Well, here's something that I would wager on, Brian. I would wager that people were up in arms about a couple of, at least one comment that Triple H made on the Logan Paul podcast. Apparently, Logan Paul has one too. He's copying us again. He's another guy that just has to emulate you and me because we're pioneers in this genre. But Logan Paul has a podcast.
He has a very, very, very popular podcast. I'm not sure if he's emulating us. I think he's doing his own thing.
Is he anywhere close to our lofty status with his podcast?
He's in a very different chart.
Well, if he keeps up with it, if he keeps up at it and he works hard, he'll get there one of these days. There's no shame in trying. But anyway, apparently Triple H was on it and had a few comments about Vince and what Vince has done for wrestling and some other things. Do you have any of that we can comment on? I believe that was something that you were looking for earlier.
I do have some audio here, and it appears the second thing I'll have to read a quote, but here's some audio of Triple H on Logan Paul's podcast, and I should know the name of it, and I don't. I'm trying to see it so I can properly attribute it.
The Logan Paul Show? Certainly it's not the Logan Paul Experience. I'll get hot.
We'll find out what it is, but here's the first quote.
I got to be an entertainer, and you told me that.
I said it to
at
you,
WrestleMania.
Right? Because I feel like that's the gap that people have, right? Even our talent that have been doing this a long time. It's not the moves, right? It's not the. It's like watching a movie. How many movies have you seen with crazy budgets and special effects and CGI that visually you go like, holy shit, that's amazing, right? And no one cares.
Story sucks.
The movie bombs. Right. There's no story. No one really fully cares, right? Because it's not about the moves, what we do. It's about what you do in between. It's the characters and the story. That's why I was saying to you, like, you know what you're doing, right? You've walked through this. You've done it. You're ready to go. You know the moves. You're an athlete. Dude, crazy good athlete that has picked this up like that. That's not easy to do. I've only seen it less than a handful of people be able to do what you've done.
Thank you.
Right? That's amazing, and you should be proud of that. But the truth is, the athleticism, all those other things, I can make a way longer list of terrible athletes that were incredibly over in this business than I can crazy athletes that were the be-all, end-all, right? People that are fanatics about what we do go like, oh my God, the match was so good. Those guys are so good right now. Everybody else is like,
Yeah.
Remember the two guys had a good match. I don't remember what.
Well, there it is. There's the quote from Triple H. And people had different takes on this. Some people said, oh, here's Triple H. The one that went around that was popular was someone tweeted out Wrestle Features, tweeted out Triple H speaking straight facts. And then other people said, maybe offended by the end where he said there are, some fans who like the good match, but other fans don't care. Other people were bothered by what he said. What is your take?
Well, I agree with much of what he said, and I also agree with people who say similar things, but I'm not sure they ever articulate it. They know what they're saying, and I know what they're saying, but I'm not sure that the people who don't know what they're saying know what they're saying. Does that make any sense? If you are in the wrestling business and are smart to the wrestling business, then you kind of understand what he's saying in that is what's happened to independent wrestling over the last 15 or 20 years. And we've talked about it. The guys that have gotten into the wrestling business weren't recruited by the old-time territory promoters or by the biggest billion-dollar company in the business today. They got into the business on an independent level because they were the die-hard fans of the work rate. That was a term that was coined maybe by Uncle Dave. I don't know. It wasn't a wrestling term. But they think that the moves and the stunts are the determining factor in whether a match is good or not. So I agree with Triple H that it's not about the moves. It's about, like MJF says, I'm the guy that makes you feel. So he doesn't have to do that stupid, crazy shit that just blends in with everybody else, and it's all you see now. And most people who liked wrestling are sick of it. And the small audience who wants to see constant trampolining moves, is kind of stagnant and is what it is. And That's the AEW core audience, but they've still got a few more that would like to become involved. And with the WWE, unfortunately, their problem is they've made the matches so boring and meaningless that even good talent can't hook the people because they've been accustomed to, trained or educated to, that it's all the drama and the horse shit and the soap opera and the entrance and the pageantry and not the actual act itself. And I guess what I'm saying is with Triple H, I think he's going to try to improve the adult level. And I'm not talking about, as we've said, nudity and tit flashing and cussing. I'm talking about speaking to adult fans and having the talent speak like adults, still have the entertainment, but maybe concentrate more on the guys that can perform in the ring. Because here's the deal. If a guy is over, as he said, crazy over, then he can also have a good match, and it's that much better. If a guy goes out and all he wants to do is emulate Tiger Mask and Dynamite Kid from 1981 and do it poorly, then the indie wrestling fans might go gaga over all the stunts that were tried, but most people wouldn't give a shit because the guys either don't look like stars or athletes or act like or are presented by them, or the venue they're in is so small time. You always need, when you're selling tickets, you always need to have a good match, sometimes a great match, especially if you're going to have a rematch. If the first one sucks, people probably won't be clamoring to see the second one. But FTR and the Briscoes, the first match was so good that the second match sold even when they weren't allowed to promote half of the participants on television because of word of mouth and because the first one registered and people wanted to see what was going to happen next with those two teams. No two other teams could have had that match, and it wouldn't have been as good. So I guess what I'm saying is, no, just wrestling moves with nondescript, bland white guys and fucking, oil change attendance, that's only going to get a subset of the audience. I don't care how many Have-A-Coronas and shooting star presses they do. If you've got guys that are crazy over, that are also kind of the shits in the ring, then a good smart booker tries to book them with a heel or a baby face to oppose them that is good in the ring and is somewhat over, so you can tell those stories and still get a match out of it that doesn't stink the joint out. And that's the sweet spot where you have personalities that are over in a personal situation where they're going to have a match that people are interested in, and they can perform at a high enough level that they will give the people the match they wanted to see and hopefully convince them they'd like to see a rematch. But all soap opera drama or all great wrestling is not going to work either way. However, and maybe unfortunately, but maybe not, Triple H is right in that if you got to have only one thing, you have to have the story and the personalities rather than the match. But it's best to have all three.
You said early on, you mentioned the way he articulated it. What are your thoughts on that? Just the way he
articulates it almost like the match is not important. The match is important unless you're just stealing a house. If you're just stealing a house, you don't care whether they like it or not, because they'll, Giant Gonzalez versus Andre the Giant. If they'd have been around in their respective primes at the same time, somebody would have booked that.
Explain to the listener who doesn't know what stealing a house means, what it means.
Stealing a house means building up an attraction that you know is going to be abysmal, but for one night people will pay to see it. And that was the standard with any time you had a gimmick performer or a football star that wasn't going to stick with wrestling, but he was over in that area, or just anything where my God, we can't have a program because this giant or this fat man or this freak or the whatever is just the shits. But because of the way he looks or because of the situation we can put him in or the way we can build him up for 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 weeks or whatever the time period is, we can get one big match out of this with our top guy or another main event guy. And then we need to get rid of this fucking gimmick because he's the shits, but we've stolen a house. We drew a house with completely smoke and mirrors and, the way that this guy looks or the way we were able to talk about him, even though there's no substance there. But they won't ever want to see it again. So he's done immediately afterwards. Silo Sam, Little John Harris. And that's how you steal a house. And then you move on to something else with, people that can go, and you don't do that constantly or you've killed your territory. But anyways, so the point is you can steal a house with an individual that people are interested in. And you can't steal a house with a great wrestling match because that needs to be built up over time. And that's why I said to Jim Herd, he loved Sid. And I loved Arn Anderson. I said, you'd rather have Sid on your fucking roster than Arn Anderson, wouldn't you? Well, of course. I said, well, because Sid will draw you $1 million in one night, right? Of course. I said, but Sid will draw you $1 million in one night, and once they see it, they probably won't ever want to see it again, but Arn Anderson can draw you steady money for the next 5 years. He'll only get better. Well, so anyway, I don't think Triple H articulated it properly in that he's really just dismissing the idea of having a good match. Now, then again, good match is different to different people. Some people think, well, my God, they didn't do any moonsaults and they didn't fight on the floor, so it was rotten. But other people would say, oh, good, they actually have enough talent to do shit right and don't have to do the same shit everybody else does. But you should have a good match if it's a high-profile match that people paid to see whenever possible.
Well, I think he was talking about the reaction after the fact more than anything.
Well, yes, but that's the thing is a lot of people who don't delve deeper into it or don't understand the viewpoint he's coming from will just think he dismissed the quality of the match whatsoever. And that's these people that say, oh, God, Cornette stuck in the past in the 70s where he wanted to see a half-an-hour headlock and a 45-minute arm bar. Like that's something that happened because they've been told it did. They weren't around.
Well, plus some wrestling was more boring than other wrestling, if we're going to be honest,
well,
too.
Yeah, and today as well. Today there's no slow-paced, boring wrestling. There's just rotten, sloppy, fast wrestling or good quality fast wrestling. It's changed in that respect, but there's always been good and bad wrestling. But again, you can't honestly expect me to believe just because you were not alive to see this shit and you have believed things that people have told you about it. You can't expect me to change my opinion of wrestling just because you don't know what you're talking about. And I guarantee, the boys have told the stories about Johnny Valentine stinking the joint out, which he would, until they quit fucking hooting at him and he was in charge. And then that's why people 50 years later still talk about Johnny Valentine in Greensboro, because they could hear him hitting fucking Wahoo McDaniel from the top row of the bleachers in a 16,000 seat building. They'd get exciting eventually. It's psychology and people go about things a different way, but no main event wrestler ever held 30-minute headlocks since the days of Strangler Lewis. And back then they were betting on, with the marks, on how long the match might go. Why do you think some of those matches went 8 hours? People were still pulling money out of their fucking pocket, you imbeciles. They weren't going 8 hours because they were having fun. So that's a lot of people say, well, so-and-so said it. You need to have personality and personal issues and disregard the quality of the match. That's not what Triple H is saying. It just sounds like it to people who lean that way. And the other people say, the match is the most important thing. So that's why we can go ahead and just put Daniel Garcia and Wheeler Useless and everybody else in these matches with recognized national TV stars and world champions, and they go 20 minutes competitively because it doesn't matter who's in it as long as it's a good match. And that's the stupidest thing that anybody says in wrestling today. So it needs both, and that's the job of a booker, and that's the job of talent, and that's the job of hitting the sweet spot. You find people they're interested in, you give them a personal issue that the fans would want to see the resolution of, and that resolution needs to be as exciting and memorable as the people want it to be, and that's how talent gets over. They don't get over by having a match with no build. They don't get over by fucking having no personality. They don't get over by once they do have a personality and get in the ring and don't have an opponent that can carry them or can do their shit and make them look good. None of that works. You got to have everything.